Hello, everyone. My name is Moises Esparza. I'm the exhibitions manager for the San Diego Latino Film Festival. Welcome to day 2 of our 27th edition, which we're producing virtually through the Eventive platform. Here with us today is the director of Border South, Raúl Paz-Pastrana. He's going to be talking with us about his amazing documentary. Let me integrate him into the Q&A so you can say hello. And then if you're following us on Eventive or social media, make sure to type out your questions and we will answer them as they come in. Raúl, how are you?
I'm good, Moises. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
Some days better than others, but surviving during these crazy times and hopefully getting more projects going.
Yeah, 2020 has definitely been a very intense year. Right before we started this Q&A, we talked about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing, which is such a devastating loss. I think to an already low morale. But thank you for bearing through it and still being able to be here with us today.
Yeah, thank you for doing this, for screening the film. We're very happy that Border South gets to be seen in San Diego and California. And we were looking forward to see it on, back in March. But things went this way and we do our best. And I think you guys are doing a great work on keeping the film festival alive.
Thank you, Raúl. Yeah, we had intended on producing the festival back in March, but due to COVID-19 precautions, we had to obviously postpone it. But we're glad that the film is reaching audiences, or your film is reaching audiences at home, where we hope they're the safest. Obviously, that's our top priority. Let's get started on talking about your film specifically, Border South. A film that really exposes some very harsh realities about broken immigration systems, both in the United States and in Mexico. Many times I think the dialogue that occurs is that it's only the United States' restrictions that are prohibitive, but as we see in your movie, Mexico has its own set of laws that make it very impossible for Central American immigrants to pass through on the way to the US border. So tell us a little bit about what you hope to expose about this with the documentary.
Yeah, it was a long journey to make the film, and the Border South came mostly as a reaction to seeing films about immigration where I was not seeing things reflected that I thought they should. Like most films about immigration usually show the hunted and humiliated migrant, which is true. The immigration porn, a lot of experts. So I wanted to do a film where we follow the migrants in a different way, and in ways that I see my family and friends express about themselves, which is funny, which is harsh, but it's always in terms of how smart they are to make one of the most dangerous crossings. So that's pretty much what I wanted to do with Border South. When I contacted Jason De Leon to work, she starts with him. He's a producer of the film and also an ethnographer who lives now in California. And so that was our goal. Our goal was to make a film that was going to expose these realities, but not in a way that is being done. It was going to be more in ways that would show more resilience and humor and other ways in how the migrants see themselves, rather than this narrative of that you see in every film, hunted and humiliated. I already mentioned that. And so that was why I started making the film. I wanted to see what I saw that family and friends were going through. And so that's the journey that we started on.
Thank you for your response. If I remember correctly, I don't think your film features any news segments, does it?
No, we don't have any news segments.
Yeah, no. Go ahead.
No, we don't have any news segments. The only expert is Jason, but Jason is actually a character in the film, and he himself sort of loses to the migrant trail. So it's not like he's a vulnerable character in the film. And we don't use music score either. It's all sound. The sound itself becomes a character in the film and like the voice of the migrant trail. So we build it slowly so that by the end of the film, when Gustavo is looking to the river, you hear all the sounds mesh into one in a very small moment, but sort of like the trail is talking to him again, and either he fears him to go back, he fears him enough to stay, or he just hears him and wants to go. Sort of like we play with sound that way.
Right. I think many times a lot of documentaries we see rely on footage from the news or other sources to kind of push the story along, but your documentary focuses on essentially two protagonists. One of them is it's Gustavo, right, from Nicaragua,
Correct.
and
Yeah.
Jason, who you mentioned, who is an anthropologist, a part of the undocumented migration project. So it's interesting to see, I guess, the sort of dynamic between the two in almost parallel worlds, in a sense. So tell me a little bit about the creative decision to have it maybe focused under like in this dichotomy. And of course, we have footage from other migrants who I think are primarily from Honduras, who are also making the trip. But the two protagonists, I'd say, they present interesting polarities in a way, even though Jason has dedicated his life to putting together the lives of these migrants through their belongings.
Yeah. So there are two main characters in there, but there essentially are three story arcs. So there is the story arc of Gustavo, who a little bit has most of the time on screen, and we see him going through a journey that's very different than most journeys that you will expect, or migrants going from Central America through Mexico to the U.S.-Mexico border. He goes in a zigzag, he comes back, and if you see all the film, you saw where he ends up not crossing the U.S., but he ends up back in Central America. And then we have Jason's thread, the rock star anthropologist who wants to do a lot, but again, the migrant trail was bigger than him. And then we have the thread of what I call fragments or echoes, voices of different Honduran migrants, catrachos throughout the trail, and it's never the same group. Or sometimes it repeats, but it's usually not intended to be that way. So they give texture to what's really happening on the ground, and so that was the challenge, is to mesh the three stories, because each one of them could be their own feature, so we wanted to take the risk of doing that. And then on top of that, there is the other narrative of sound, which is the migrant trail sort of. So it was a risky game to do those in that way. I feel like it pays off, and it shows different realities, like the reality of the archaeologist in way, or anthropologist, ethnographer, in ways that usually you don't see, and the reality of a Central American Nicaraguan crossing who gets shot by Mexican police, and yet he gets into this world that he wasn't expecting. So through that world, we get to see things how they happen in Mexico, and through Jason, we see what happened once you get to the U.S.-Mexico border, and through the other ones, we see more humorous moments throughout the trail with the catrachos, the Hondurans crossing.
Yeah, the film is so lyrical and moving, and I think there's a lot of subtext between these two central protagonists in a way. When you see Jason going through and finding the belongings that were left on the trail, you were left wondering as a viewer, who was this person? Where is her family? And a few moments later, we cut back to the immigrants who are on the journey themselves. So in a way, there's some really neat connection there where I think the subtext becomes fully textual as viewers. And I really appreciated that allowance that you gave that you gave as a director to let us know, like, to fulfill in a way that desire as a spectator to round out stories, because I think that's who we are as film goers. We want to get the full picture, and there in your film there exists such beautiful connections between these two characters.
Yeah, so you mentioned news earlier, so that's if you use a lot of information, a lot of news, you lose on the texture of the intimate stories. So we bet more on these connections that you tie, these subtexts, and have them slowly revealed throughout the film and create a whole picture as a film instead of explaining a lot of the of the political things that are very important, but there are great New York Times articles about it. There are great LA Times articles about it. There are other documentaries that are very educational that way, and so we didn't want to try to combine those two. We want to just to focus on the subtext and the texture, on the feeling of being there a lot more, and highlight that type of highlight that instead of the news, as you mentioned, or experts. Or
and how did you meet Gustavo? Like, how did you come across him?
Yeah, Gustavo. I mean, originally the film was the echoes that you mentioned, that you see them on the trail. The migrants crossing through Mexico, and Jason, and they were going to pair one and one, and one Jason never sees them, and in the other one you see them very much alive. And then the co-producer and ethnographer John, he was working at a shelter in central Mexico, in Apizaco, in Tlaxcala. And he was doing sound for the film and co-producing as well, because he was being there for a year, and I would go film and I would hang out with him. He worked for Jason at Undocumented Migration Project, so he was part of the team. And then one day he calls me like, "Hey, Raúl, there's this great character. You and I have been talking about how the garroteros and the police kill migrants from Veracruz to Mexico City. They shoot them when they're on the train. Well, we have someone who got shot and survived. And so do you want to come check him out? He's really cool." So I went in, and as soon as I met Gustavo, it was like, he's just a charismatic character. It was so easy. He was open to being filmed. He was also having this sort of stardom because he survived and he got into the news. So it was like an interesting world that I was not expecting on the migrant trail to see. Like in Mexico, they get killed and they get buried and disappear, right? Migrants. So, or even if they get shot, sometimes they just move on because they don't want to waste time. So it was like an interesting world to arrive there with Gustavo. So that's how I met him. He was healing from his wound. It had been like 3 weeks, and yeah, we started filming him, and he was very open, and it was really great to meet him and to film him. He was an amazing person.
Yeah, I think many documentaries, it takes a beat to kind of connect with the protagonist, because sometimes it feels studied or maybe too rigidly academic. It doesn't feel lived in or authentic. But you must have formed a really tight connection with Gustavo, because the footage of him is just, it feels so almost like lived in, and there's no narration in your documentary, correct? If I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's not hard, but I think sometimes we're guided along on the documentary journeys through narration. In this one, I feel so immediately connected to Gustavo, but also to Jason, who I think there's a scene that kind of sticks out in my mind about the movie, is when he's going through the belongings of people, and he says, not verbatim, but he says something like he's almost committing a violation of privacy or an intrusion. Really like valuable moment that I think makes you sit back and think, wow, these individuals deserve so much dignity or so much more dignity than sometimes is given to them in mass media. So I guess maybe go into depth a little bit about, perhaps this is more of an editing question, but how did you decide how to round out Jason's role in the film?
Yeah, Jason, because he's also a producer in the film, I was very aware of not letting him see his story as much as the other two stories. So when I would share cuts, I will not show his cuts until like the very, because I wanted to make sure that he wasn't directing his story, because he's a character in the film, and I wanted him to be vulnerable. And Jason has done TV before, and he had a show on the Discovery Channel and so stuff like that. So, and he's he's a very well known person. So he's very aware of the camera. He knows where it is, and so but he. And so I wanted to be able to find these moments where he's not so he's more vulnerable, right? He's a very well-known ethnographer, and it's very easy to follow the path of this person that has it together and knows what he's doing. When in reality, Jason, as he will tell you this, he'll tell you he doesn't know what he's doing, but it's more fun to see it and sad at the same time. Like that scene. When he's looking at and he's in the lab on the Documented Migration Project lab, they're looking at what migrants leave behind. In that scene, he's looking at this and he sort of had that realization, like, oh, feels intrusive, but it's part of the work. I think that's what he says. There is another scene when he's going to see he finds because he found a body, he gets contacted to find other bodies, and so he's looking for this kid, Jose. And there's a scene when he's going to go talk to the mom. And he keeps talking a lot, and he's telling her what they've been doing to find this kid. And then the mom is like, I dreamed that you're going to bring him back. So next time I see you, I know it's going to be good news. And at this point, he knows he's not going to bring him back, right? But the quiet of Jason just looking down. And to me, those little scenes where he realizes something as he's doing things, because it's all present tense. And I think that's the beauty of doing a present tense observational film or verite, is that you get to catch characters off guard, and Jason, who's very guarded and knows where the camera is all the time, when you get those moments, it just gives a bigger picture of who he really is, though, and how he doesn't have it together, really. I mean, he's well regarded, but the migrant trail is bigger than him, and he's finding out the hard way. He cannot find this kid, but he cannot find a lot of people. And you remember the last scene when he's talking to migrants. That scene, to me, his character starts from a person that knows everything pretty much, as a kick-ass anthropologist, which he is, to someone who becomes more vulnerable as the story goes along, to the point that all he can do is tell migrants what to do if a friend dies. That's how when he started, from being the know-and-all, doing technology, doing ethnography, to just all you can do with all of that is just tell somebody what to do if a friend dies. And so to me, that's the journey that Jason took, and that's what I saw when I was filming him. And is that the pain of doing the job that he does, and even filmmakers, is that at some point you cannot bring people back, and you cannot change the world, and there's very little that you can do, and so that was the idea of Jason's character development. Gustavo, on the other hand, was like same as Jason. Things were happening to him as we were filming, so I think that gave us an opportunity to get into his world in ways that otherwise we wouldn't be able to. We would have to get narration to get back into that. But we were filming as things were happening to him, and he was making choices, both of them. So that was, and I think that's what helped us to make the film the way it is.
And then Jason also had a scene. I don't remember the name of the organization, but they're going through a binder, which is huge. And he said something along the lines of like, do people ever stop looking for these people or something? Or like, and the woman responds like, I've never been in a situation where people stop looking. And I guess even thinking about the movie now and your use of the word echo, which I think is a really powerful metaphor for what your film is trying to say, in the sense that these people whose lives are lost along the trail, they had voices too, and they deserve to be heard. And I think the amplification happens through documentaries such as yours, so we hear almost like that silent echo that's representative of these individuals' experiences. I want to get into more like the, I guess, the actual making of the movie. When you were in Mexico, how was your relationship with the surroundings? And by surroundings, I mean maybe the police who shot Gustavo. Was that contentious? Like, how do they react to you being there?
It is very interesting. Mexico is another beast when it comes to film. We can go in detail on this, and actually there are Q&As that Jason and I have done, and we go in really, really detail about how we do things in Mexico. And John as well, who the co-producer who filmed with me. And actually, John is a big piece of this, just because he's a white ethnographer, blue eye, and that actually, on the criminal side, on the people that might steal our equipment on the trail, that helped us a lot, having someone that is American and white just right away, because then they don't want to mess with you right away, because they don't want to, even the police, the Mexican police, they don't want to rattle they having it good, right, taking advantage of migrants. So they don't want to mess with, they might mess with me if I'm just a Mexican, as they do. You know, Mexico is the most dangerous country for journalists. If you're Mexican or Central American, if you're European or American, it's not dangerous to you, right? That's why a lot of people who cover Mexico are actually Americans living in Mexico, right? So it's very dangerous if you're a Mexican. So if it was just me going there, I mean, I would just, but having someone that's white, like John, was good. But they were, you mentioned the garroteros. That's one of the parts where that was dangerous, because the garroteros didn't give a damn. The garroteros, the Mexican police in that area, they kill people all the time, and they still do. They shoot them on the train and bury them or burn them. They just extort them. They take money of migrants. But they are a very weird police that is part private and part state-owned. I believe Peña Nieto owned the particular where we were filming. So that's those guys didn't care. And Gustavo mentions it there. They know where I live. He was very public. He mentions in the film. That's when he decides to leave, because he sees them passing by on the train, on top of the train. And John, who was working there, when I leave, John will stay. And he said that they would start following him, and he felt like they were looking at him. And so that was one of the few places where it was actually dangerous. Again, when we filmed in northern Mexico, was dangerous. Again, we have some things happening there that could have been kidnappings, and we would film in Tamaulipas, in Nuevo Laredo. And at a time when there was no police, because the two cartels were fighting for power. So the Marines and the Army, each one represented a cartel, and there was no police. So it was like and that's when Gustavo was in there when we're filming in northern Mexico. And that's one of the reasons he decides to move. We don't mention on the film, there were too many reasons. So to make story short, it was very dangerous. Having a white person that's not Mexican or Central American helped. And that, they don't want to mess with you as much. But then again, the other part that's bad about that is that you get stopped by police a lot for mordidas, for briberies. If they see a white person in the car, they stop you all the time. So I even had to have like a little fund when I was with John to pay briberies. So it's
wow.
So it's a dynamic that I worked that way. I filmed a lot of times by myself, a lot of times with Jason. And those were dangerous times too in South Mexico, but nothing was as dangerous as the garroteros that you mentioned, because they didn't give a damn. Those guys could disappear anybody, and they didn't care. So I don't think I answered your question. I think it was good and bad, and some things worked for me and some things didn't, and it's dangerous, and it could have been worse, I guess I'm trying to say.
And how long were you shooting for? How long did it take for you to film a documentary?
Well, it took me 5 years to finish the film, 4 years to shoot, I would say. For just to shoot, each story took different trajectories. The first years there's no funding, so you have to try to do it however you can. And so whatever I get a chance to film with Jason, I would. And then as you start getting more and more access and more confidence with your character, especially Gustavo, then you just go more and more and more and more to the point that you just want to keep going, because it is. You mentioned danger, but it's also a lot of fun to film on the train tracks, on the shelters, hanging out, seeing a part of Mexico that you usually don't see when you go there as a tourist. Like just being there, eating on the tracks, meeting characters that I'm never gonna be able to see again unless I do it this way. Because it was just me and John filming, or me and Jason. It was just like a 2-people crew. Sometimes we paid a third person to carry the tripod, because I tried to shoot the film on a tripod, most of it.
Oh my
but
God.
some of them I couldn't. I used this. So it is. It was a two mostly, but sometimes 3 people crew, and so it was fun. It was a lot of fun to hang out with migrants and just hang out. When I start filming, and this is true for every film I do, that's my film. I don't film right away. It takes days, sometimes weeks before I carry the camera, but I don't turn it on. And
Oh,
I
wow.
remember John, who was doing sound, he's like, "Are you gonna film, man? Are you gonna film?" Like we're hanging out, and and so um and so that's all to say that it was the hanging out part and the being there that I liked so much. Sometimes I needed to wait for the right moments that I felt that they were correct to film and also appropriate, also and safe for my character. So those 3 things came into mind when I'm filming on the Migrant Trail.
And well, you described the filmmaking process, and then the editing. What was that like? Were there many other stories that you wanted to include? Tell me what the process was like, because I'm not a documentarian, but I feel like that the editing room is where it all comes together potentially.
Yeah, somebody said I was in a Q&A last week or 2 weeks ago, and somebody said is where on the editing is when the film gets shaped. So I think it's true, even though I'm more heavy on the camera, it is true that in the editing is shaped. In documentary, I think it's true in even in fiction, but in documentary particularly, you get a lot of footage, right? Sometimes, and so we had tons of stories we couldn't film, and some stories I wanted it to film, like, you know what ficheras are, like prostitutes, sort of.
Okay.
And I tried to film them. I went with ethnographers to film, but they are so vulnerable, and they get killed all the time, murder. So just me trying to do that, I would put more danger to them. So in the field, I couldn't tell every story I want. Now filming, yeah, there were many stories that I wanted to put in. There were a lot of things that happened to Jason that I wanted to add. That are very humorous. Like the ethnographers have this humor, this very dark humor that it takes time to get. It's like doctor's humor, a little darker,
Okay.
but it takes
Yeah,
time
yeah.
to get. And if you don't put it correctly, it might rub people the wrong way. So I had to take that out a little bit just because it will take a long time to put in. There's stories, I mean, from Gustavo himself that I didn't put in. There were many characters. My main character died, Chino, Jason was working with him in South Mexico, in Chiapas, and he was going to be the main character. Him and his friend, the guy who was making the tattoos with
Yeah.
the guitar string, it was him and his best friend. They were going to be the main characters, but his best friend Chino, I have a little short. I have a 5-minute short about him, but he was going to be the main character. He got killed by another gang member 3 weeks after we did our last interview with him. So that story couldn't happen. And so, yeah, there's a lot of material to make stories about the shelters that I was in. There's one shelter in La 72 in Tabasco, in Tenosique, Tabasco. It's probably the most beautiful shelter you'll see anywhere, right? And it's just very welcoming to LGBTQ immigrants. It's very welcoming to women. And it's like the first thing they face, and children. And then after that, the shelters start not getting that good. But every shelter could be their own film, I guess. Chagüites, when the guys are singing karaoke, that shelter no longer exists. But that shelter was the only shelter in Mexico run by Central Americans at the time we were filming. And I could have made a short with the material that I have about that shelter, very different than the other shelter. And the reality was, I mean, they were more in constant danger because they were in an area where they were very isolated. Eventually, that shelter closed because the people from Mexico in that area didn't want it. And so, yes, to answer your question, you had many stories that I could not put in the film, that I could not make another film about for time and money because my characters died, because I would put characters in danger, people in danger. So that's what I'm. So I guess you're totally right, man. I couldn't put a lot of things.
Yeah, and I guess maybe more of a broader question for you is, I'm personally an immigrant myself. The story resonates with me in a very particular way. But I guess, what type of people do you think need to see this documentary?
So it is very funny though, when you're making a film and you're applying for grants, there's the audience question, right? Who is your audience? And as a POC immigrant filmmaker, who migrated here when I was very young because of poverty in Mexico, right? Some people migrate from poverty, other people migrate for war, other people migrate for political issues. To me, when I ask that question, I'm always thinking, well, I want to get this funding, so I should put whoever the funders think the audience should be. And you're applying to, I don't know, Sundance, you might be thinking, I want everybody to watch it, or I want to educate white people. Usually that's what you think. When you say general audiences, you're like, I want to educate white people. And when I think about it, when I was writing the grants, when I say everybody should see this film, to what I really was thinking in my mind after finishing the film, my audience, I always wanted my audience to be Central Americans and undocumented immigrants and immigrants that came here not because they could, And that was my main audience internally, and that's something that filmmakers like myself, when we are applying for grants, we usually don't put, because, and I think it's true, we can get penalized. Like, why will Sundance want to fund you if you only want to outreach immigrants, right? They want to educate white people. That's what you're thinking. That's my thought. So anyways, when the film came out, my most of the first places where the film screened was Sheffield, which is all white, Affy Dogs, which is all white, in Washington, D.C. And then there were a few more, but then it was Margaret Mead in New York City, that's where I was living at the time. I live in Denver now, and which I knew my community there in East Harlem was all immigrant, and I know they were going to go see it. And so that was my first test. And then the next one was New Orleans, where all of our audience on our first screening was Central America, mostly Central Americans from El Salvador, Honduras. I mean, New Orleans did a great job in that they made it on a Sunday, and they made the first screening for free. And I have a lot of family in New Orleans, so I move a lot through the Spanish-speaking media. So our first screening was mostly Central Americans, mostly Hondurans. People were packed. There were grandmothers with kids. I was like shitting in my pants. I'm like, they're not gonna like this film. I made this film, and they're just gonna hate it because I don't have the traditional things that you see when you make a film. I don't have the expert telling their struggles. I don't have them being put in places that are where they feel victimized, and because that's what I see, and I'm thinking. So all this was going through my mind, and in both New York and in New Orleans, after the screening, I stayed and I talked to people because the Q&As would not give us enough time. And I remember in New York, people that are never watched documentaries, all Central Americans or Mexicans were there, and I know their friends, they're like, they loved it. They couldn't stop watching it. They loved the way, because of the reasons that you mentioned. They love how it was an adventure film. And in New Orleans, they were like, I loved, one person told me, we are fucking smart. Because after watching the film, was like, we do this that way, we're very smart. Other person came out and was like, I was crying because I crossed through that area, I forgot about how it is to pass through there. And I remember doing this. I remember drinking coffee there, and it's something that I buried within myself, but seeing it again, I was crying the whole time. Someone went to the shelters that we filmed, and it was like it became like for people to Central America, it became like they were watching the film, and they were also reliving the film, their journey in a similar way to how they actually did it. And so they were like, it was like a healing, painful healing, and in a way powerful, because they saw themselves as smart individuals that are crossing this fucking dangerous route, instead of how they usually see themselves portrayed. And so it's been a hit with Central Americans and with undocumented communities. So that's the audience that I really wanted, that I was fearful even to put on a grant, is the audience that is liking the film. So who should see this film? I would say immigrants, undocumented immigrants, refugees from all around the world, and Central Americans who will see themselves portrayed in a film not as victimized and humiliated, but as powerful, fucking smart individuals that are crossing one of the most dangerous routes in the world, if not the most dangerous, when it has to do with crime and corruption.
Well, thanks for the answer, Raul. We're nearing the end of our Q&A allotted time, but I want to know, I guess, leave us with what's coming next for you. What projects are you working on? Has this pandemic era been creatively stimulating, or what's next?
So COVID really destroyed a lot of projects I was working on. One in particularly that we're trying to rethink about how to do, and another one just because I haven't been able to film. But they're like, and now I'm focusing more local in Denver. Working with local filmmakers here, since it's safer to film here. We have more control. But I'm still doing other films outside. So another film that I'm working on is another visual ethnographic observational film by Border South, but now more focused on the poetics that you mentioned. But I want to even focus it more on the poetic part of Border South, and it's about the grooms behind the Kentucky Derby, which are all Mexican and Guatemalan, pretty much. And nothing about the jockeys or the trainers, or as they have been portrayed in the past, the grooms as wanted to be jockeys, mostly as observational through the seasons and what it takes to take care of the horses, because they are the ones who actually take care of the horses. It's not the jockeys, it's not the trainers. So I want an observational film about them in Kentucky, which we wanted to start in June. It moved to September. Now it's going to be moved to March.
Of next year? Okay.
Because of COVID. And then I'm doing 2 amazing films, working with somebody who's here with Chad, Alan Dominguez. We're working on a film together here in Denver, Colorado, about a kick-ass EMT, Mexican-American EMT who drives an ambulance, but also who has depressions. And it's a lot about, we're actually doing a short for LPB about that, but we're expanding it into a feature for Latino public broadcast. And we're expanding it into a feature about depression in Latinx communities. But it's very intimate, and it's going to be a lot of fun to make. So
the short is coming to LPB? Or?
Yeah, in October. The short's coming in October, and Alan and I are going to expand it into a feature. She's amazing. Her name is Dulce Bueno, and she's is an EMT with tattoos, but it's as sweet as her name. So, and then we're working on other projects locally as well. So I'm trying to focus locally with one film that's outside, but it's been a struggle because of COVID, and I don't know. But the creative juices have come back in the past month or two. Yeah, so. And I feel I really want to film. I really want to edit. I really want to get these films out. Yeah.
Well, I hope that everyone's lives, ours included, approach some sort of normalcy, and that you're able to shoot a film very, very soon. Raúl, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm just super thankful to be able to have this conversation with you. Thank you for sharing this documentary with the festival. And I wish you nothing but the best on all of your future endeavors. And I hope to one day be able to screen one of your movies in a movie theater and then be able to have a Q&A in person.
That would have been amazing, because Border South looks great on the big screen with a 5.1 surround system and all that. And thank you so much, San Diego Latino Film Festival, for having Border South. We were sending it at the very end, and I'm so glad you guys took it. And hopefully we'll go back again and live, as you mentioned, and have a lot of fun with the Q&A with people right in front of us.
Very cool. Well, until we see each other again, thank you so much, Raúl.
Gracias, Moises.
Yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. We have many more Q&A scheduled throughout the week. I'm going to throw on the website as our post-roll plays. Thank you for all of your support, and long live the San Diego Latino Film Festival. Thank you.
Thank you so much.